Good evening. My name is Alexandra Green, and I'm the curator for Southeast Asia at the British Museum. And this evening, I'm going to be talking about the Raffles collection at the British Museum. This is material that Stamford Raffles collected during his time on Java between 1811 and 1816. The title of my talk is Sir Stamford Raffles, Views of Java. In this presentation, I'm going to explore the shape of Raffles collections at the British Museum. And in particular, I will look at the relationship between the Javanese materials that Raffles collected and contemporary ideas in Britain and Europe to reveal the specific beliefs and ambitions that Raffles held. Thomas Stamford Raffles was born on board a ship near Jamaica in July 1781. The family was of modest means, and he began work as a clerk at the East India Company at the age of 14. In 1805, he traveled to Penang as assistant secretary to the governor there. He contributed substantially to the expedition against Java in 1811, and his patron, Lord Minto, established him as lieutenant governor of the island, a position that Raffles held until 1816. At the end of his time in Java, he returned to Britain. While he was in Britain, in 1816 to 1817, he published a 2-volume book entitled The History of Java. And he received a knighthood in response. This was given by the Prince Regent, the future King George IV, in response. The British Museum holds more than 2,000 objects associated with Raffles. The majority, nearly 1,500, are from the Indonesian island of Java, primarily collected during that British interregnum when Raffles was lieutenant governor. A further 500 are Chinese coins found on Java, and the remainder includes items from Sumatra, Nias, India, Myanmar, Thailand. The Javanese collections comprise more than 360 drawings of ancient Hindu Buddhist sites on Java, over 100 Hindu Buddhist sculptures in metal, a few examples in stone, more than 360 shadow puppets, over 130 masks, 44 wayang klitik, and 46 wayang krucil gilig. There are also models and Chris ritual daggers. These arrived at the British Museum after the death of his widow in 1859. And then later, we received more material. The British Museum received more material from a great-grand niece in 1939. This comprises just a part of what Raffles collected during his many years in Asia. There are 80 Malay manuscripts and 45 Javanese ones in the Royal Asiatic Society, a group of gamelan instruments in Claydon House in Buckinghamshire, Chris ritual daggers in the Royal Collection Trust, and more than 100 natural history drawings at the British Library. Customs lists from 1816 demonstrate that there was much more, including objects from Japan, gold ornaments, lacquer, ceramics, textiles, and so forth. We also have some records of what Raffles lost when the ship that was to take him back to Britain in 1824 burned and sank 50 miles off the coast of Bengkulu, Sumatra, in February 1824. This is an image of the fire on the Fame and the people escaping. They rode 50 miles back to Bengkulu. The collections on the Fame included diamonds from the court of Yogyakarta, gold, textile examples for British manufacturers, weapons, and curiosities. That's the word they used in those days for objects of other cultures. There were also numerous ancient Malay manuscripts, books and dictionaries, and grammars of regional languages. Live animals specially trained for the voyage to Europe, botanical samples, and more than 2,000 natural history drawings also sank with the ship. In the sinking of the ship, Raffles also lost paperwork from his administrative posts and the notes and materials to write further histories of the region. In the 2-month interval until another ship arrived, he collected material again and commissioned as many new natural history drawings as possible, but the destruction of all his materials and papers made it impossible for him to continue as a scholar of Southeast Asia when he returned to Europe. But I would like to go back to the Raffles collections at the British Museum. Why did Raffles collect what he did? Why do the collections have this type of shape? I would like to argue that we can start to answer these questions by understanding in his writings, as well as the ideas circulating in Europe at the time. In the history of Java, Raffles collated as much information about the island as he could, discussing everything from geography, climate, plants and animals, population, and foreign settlers, to history, agriculture, manufacturing, the origin of the Javanese people and their character, clothing, commerce, cultural activities from court and village, theater and other contemporary arts, weaponry, language, religion, literature, comparative vocabularies, astrology, and antiquities. The 2 volumes are substantial bodies of information, although not all of it was written by Raffles, and whole sections are quotes from reports, observations, and journals of other people. In his history of Java, Raffles argued that the Javanese were a civilized people who had the potential to benefit from colonial rule. This was in keeping with European Enlightenment ideas about what a civilization was at the time. These ideas ranked human societies on a scale from savage to civilized, and a society's history was thought to show how progressive it was. The European assumption, of course, was that their civilization was superior to all others, but that people could be improved with their assistance, especially from people more civilized than themselves. Raffles collected objects that he felt illustrated the most refined, the most civilized elements of Javanese culture. His ideas for an advanced civilization were based on typical European standards of the time. These criteria included writing, national history, but national history in a European empirical sense, music, monumental architecture, commercial enterprise, and a progressive form of government. In other words, a European capitalist style of government. Raffles also followed contemporary scientific trends, collecting sets of objects instead of individual examples. He was one of the first people to apply the Enlightenment notion of systematic collecting to cultural material, in addition to natural history specimens. However, these groups of objects were not systematic by Javanese standards, indicating his incomplete understanding of local culture. Additionally, it can be argued that Raffles was interested in the information that objects could provide rather than appreciating the aesthetic qualities. The objects instead demonstrate that Raffles chose items that were exotic by European standards, but which could be considered to indicate civilization, particularly national history, according to European standards. There are gaps, many gaps in Raffles' collection. These provide insights into his economic priorities and religious prejudices. He gave his textiles to British manufacturers to assist them to compete in global trade, so there are only 2 in the British Museum collection. Also, even though the Javanese were mostly Muslim, Raffles did not collect Islamic objects, since like many Europeans of the period, he viewed Islam negatively. There are only 2 drawings of the Wali Songo Maulana Malik Ibrahim's tomb in Gresik in the collection. This is one of the 2 drawings. And this is one of 2 pieces of batik from Java that the British Museum holds that were collected by Raffles. These were apparently gifts to him, but since many of his all of his papers, many of his papers sank in 1824. We cannot necessarily confirm that. In the remainder of my talk, I have divided Raffles' collections into 4 main groups: those associated with rank and status in European minds, Hindu-Buddhist material, Javanese theatrical objects, and profit. I will explore the reasons that Raffles collected each group in turn. So rank, status, and value. In their writings about Java, Europeans often mentioned clothing and accoutrements that indicated rank and status or were valuable in their own eyes, such as diamond buttons and gold jewelry. Yet such items do not form a majority in Raffles' collections. There are no gold or silver objects collected by Raffles in the British Museum, British Library, or Royal Asiatic Society. And the location of the Javanese women's gold ornaments mentioned in the 1816 customs lists is now unknown. In the Royal Collection Trust, however, there are 7 Kris daggers and sheaths, 1 sword and scabbard, and a spear, all with elaborate designs in gold, silver, and gems. These objects are in the Royal Collection Trust because in 1817, Raffles gave them to the Prince Regent, who was a weapons enthusiast. Although the 16 Krises in the British Museum are mostly well-made and handsome, they are not as indicative of wealth and status according to European standards. The fact that Raffles kept these Kris and gifted his gold and gem encrusted examples suggests that the latter were viewed as a means to promote himself. Kris were exotic in Britain, and they could function as gifts to superiors, an important part of social and political interactions at the time. So therefore, we see why some pieces are in the Royal Collection Trust, gifts to royalty, and some were in the British Museum, where they came many years after Raffles' death. And as I said, they were, by European standards, the less important ones. Now, if we turn to this concept of history and art, looking at the Hindu-Buddhist materials. So Raffles collected and commissioned drawings and plans of Java's ancient Hindu and Buddhist sites and sculpture. The more than 350 works on paper in Raffles' collection at the British Museum display several different formats, ranging from hasty sketches to pencil to detailed scale diagrams and reconstructions. However, some of these images recorded material systematically. However, many of the illustrations bear little resemblance to actual monuments and sculptures, but appealed to European tastes at the time for romantic ruins and exotic objects. Most of the architectural drawings featured in the history of Java were produced in this picturesque style, displaying ruined buildings partially covered with vegetation and located in a deserted landscape in order to popularize the book. Many images also reveal that the Europeans did not understand what they were looking at. Here in this picture, an image of the Hindu deity Indra, we can see that the figure has been drawn against a grid background to try and give a proper understanding of its size and to record it scientifically. The god Indra is shown riding on his elephant, carrying a thunderbolt, and the sculpture was found on the Dieng Plateau. The drawing was made by G.P. Baker, who spent 3 weeks drawing the art of the Dieng Plateau in 1815. This is a large drawing done before Raffles arrived on Java by the Dutch draftsman H.C. Cornelius. It shows Chandi Arjuna, also on the Dieng Plateau, in three ways of drawing it. So first you have the floor plan. Secondly, you have a side view where you also see what the interior is like. And third, you have a reconstructed image. But this last illustration is an invention by the artist because the building was in ruins when Cornelius drew it in 1807, And you can see from the roof structure that this is a European invention. This is not a superstructure that you would find in Southeast Asia and not in Java. There are also some watercolors shown in European style called picturesque, where the building is shown as a ruin in an empty landscape. These types of pictures were supposed to cause feelings of heartache and also a feeling that the scene was beautiful. This example was done also in 1815 by another Dutchman, J.W.B. Vardenaar. And he was also working for Raffles, and he was charged with uncovering Trouwellaan, the capital of Majapahit. And this was one of the buildings that they uncovered and that they cleared the vegetation from, and Vardenaar drew it as a watercolor. There was also a huge interest in monumental sculpture, as we can see with this drawing of Nandi the bull. Stone sculpture and stone buildings were of particular importance to Europeans because they considered them to be indicative of civilization, a high level of civilization, which wood or brick represented lower levels of civilization. We also, with some of the sculptural drawings, we also see that the Europeans really did not understand what they were looking at. So in the case of the Chandi Arjuna, we can see that the artist has invented what he could not see. In this case, they could see the image, but they found it difficult to understand. This is an image of the sun god Surya, but instead of being in a Southeast Asian style chariot, he is in a European style chariot with the trappings on the horses also being in European style. This was done by Frederick van Bockholtz in the late 1780s. So we can see here that the Europeans, even when they could see the objects, sometimes didn't understand it and therefore drew it in a style that they could understand. Raffles collected many of these drawings in order to provide information for his book and also to bring back to Europe to show people what Java was like. Because Europeans considered the ancient stone buildings and imagery to be Java's cultural high point, the fact that the structures were in ruins demonstrated to them that the present was in a state of decline. Yet the evidence of a high point, according to European standards, of course, suggested that the decline could be reversed. By collecting antiquities and showing Javanese monuments in a state of decay, Raffles argued that the Javanese were a once great civilization that had the potential to be re-civilized as a British colony. Yet other than the drawings and also some small metal sculptures, Raffles collected little Hindu Buddhist material. A factor of collecting that is not usually considered is the issue of ease of transport. And I suggest this is precisely what encouraged the collection of drawings and small, lightweight objects. Nearly half of Raffles' collection of drawings at the British Museum depicts stone sculptures from Central and Eastern Java. While Raffles took a few stone sculptures for himself, there are 5 in the British Museum, and sent some large sculptures abroad as gifts to individuals and museums, he mostly collected drawings of sculptures because they were easily transportable. All of Raffles' stone sculptures are small and can be lifted by one person. This also explains why Raffles collected so many small bronze sculptures, and there are very few drawings of bronze sculptures because he was able to collect the actual object itself. Bronze, silver, and gold religious sculptures were produced on Java from approximately 600 to 1500. Raffles brought back more than 100 small metal objects because he collected groups of materials, and these pieces were easily portable. Most were Buddhist deities, as seen here with the Buddhist Vairocana. but at a very few were Hindu. Small metal objects that he could not collect were reproduced in drawings, of which the British Museum holds 3, like this. And the poor quality of the sketching makes me wonder if Raffles did it himself. Like Raffles' other collections, the metal sculptures do not represent a broad survey and consist mostly of examples from early time periods. Some deities are heavily represented, such as the Buddha Akshobhya. There are 9 examples. Others are not represented at all, such as the Hindu deity Shiva, Siva. Raffles boasted that he had a complete set of Hindu figures, despite the fact that most are Buddhist, demonstrating the lack of understanding that Europeans had of Asian religions at the time. By the early 1800s, such figures were often kept in Javanese private collections as pusaka. Raffles misunderstood their role in Javanese society, thinking that the figures were believed to be representations of actual family ancestors. For Raffles, such collections were a positive sign of civilization, since they indicated an interest in preserving the past in a European way. He didn't understand them as being representative more generally of ancestral figures or being handed down by the ancestors. Javanese stopped making metal figures around the 1500s as Islam spread across Java, but they began making figures again, small metal figures again, in the late 1700s or early 1800s as they became aware of European interest. However, the Muslim Javanese at the time did not know Hindu-Buddhist iconography, and the new figures draw upon contemporary imagery, such as the Punakawan and makers' imaginations. This figure is an example, and around the sides of the throne are images of the Punakawan. Europeans at the time did not understand Hinduism or Buddhism as well, and so did not recognize the figures as later objects that were not Hindu or Buddhist, but were more contemporary productions. So Raffles collected more than 20 of these pieces, which are, I would say, an early example of tourist art. Now turning to Raffles' theatrical collections. Raffles' theatrical collections are particularly large, comprising more than 360 shadow puppets, 44 flat wooden puppets, wayang klitik, 46 wayang krucil gilig, 130 wayang topeng, and over 55 full-sized or model gamelan instruments. The masks primarily originated in Central Java, but there are also examples from Cirebon on the north coast and possibly some examples from Eastern Java. Most look like they were unused, and in some cases the carving is quite rough. It may be that Raffles commissioned them to be made for him. You can see here an image of the character Rangalawe, and here is the clown Jurude. The wayang kulit puppets come from Cirebon and Central Java, possibly the Kartasura area, as suggested by some Javanese scholars. This is a comic character, Garuluk, and we see here a sacred puppet of Bhima. The style of these suggests that many were produced in Cirebon, and also, as I said, probably from the courts of Kartasura, of Surakarta, pardon me. The wayang klitik are also from Central and Eastern Java. And we see here, these were all labeled, and they're all missing their rods because they were sawn off, possibly as part of the process of transporting them back to Britain. And this is Ajar Pamengar from the Damarwulan narratives. And the British Museum also holds these wayang krucil gilig, possibly from the Surakarta courts, possibly that of Mangkunegara. This is the character Sabda Palon, also from the Damarwulan narratives. The gamelan instruments, the gamelan instruments are partial sets from about 5 different orchestras. According to their designs, they are mostly from the northeastern coast and Madura areas, the largest grouping of which shows a series of animal forms where the designs are more exuberant. So this is a kanong and it's beater with carved floral decoration. And this is the largest group, though no complete gamelan orchestra is found at the British Museum. So this grouping with the red and black and gold and animal decoration, there are only 6 examples. Raffles did not collect wayang beber and wayang golek. So the British Museum does not have any of those in its collection. None of these groups, puppets or musical instruments, would be one formed by the Javanese. The instruments in each group are insufficient for a proper performance, and the puppets would not allow for more than a very limited repertoire of narratives. Like Raffles' other collections, this material represents his superficial understanding of the topics and demonstrates that he was not collecting on Javanese terms. So you wouldn't be able to do a complete performance of wayang kulit or a complete performance using the wayang klitik or the wayang krucil gilig. The collections are too random. So why did Raffles collect this material? From his writings, it is possible to see a main reason for the theatrical collections. Raffles connected Javanese poetry, music, and theater with European-style national history, all important aspects of European ideas about civilization. He thought that the different types of theater linked with different historical time periods. Wayang Purwa, Wayang Gedog, and Wayang Klitik were all representations of Javanese history. The reign of Parikesit, the grandson of Arjuna, the end of his reign until the start of the kingdom of Pajajaran, and from Pajajaran to the end of the Majapahit Empire. So Wayang Purwa was the earliest history, Wayang Gedog was the middle history, and Wayang Klitik was later history. For Raffles, the theater was also associated with the upper classes of society. Shows were partially performed in the Kawi language, which Raffles defined as Java's classic language, distinct from others on the island and very ancient. And he wrote that Kawi indicated that the Javanese were once an advanced civilization. Raffles was also very interested in education, and he wrote that theatrical performances helped people learn about history. As a result, Raffles viewed the theater as good and showing a high level of civilization, and therefore he collected this material. The reason he collected so much material, so many puppets, so many gamelan instruments, even though they were from different orchestras, was because he was trying to collect in sets. But as I said, his understanding of those sets was insufficient. So the sets are not complete on Javanese terms. If we turn to profit now, despite his cultural interests, Raffles also wanted colonies to make a profit. They were supposed to be a source of revenue. Raffles and his European compatriots regularly exclaimed positively over the fertility and lushness of Java, which encouraged his enthusiasm for the development of the island as a British colony. He also noted the potential for a textile trade. As is evident from Raffles' packing lists, he not only collected for himself, but also for British business interests. There were vegetable and other samples, textiles, 5 drawings of plows and rakes, and 1 set each of carpenters' and farmers' tools. There are only a few model tools in the collection, and they match some of the drawings, demonstrating that they were the basis of the drawings and suggesting that there are many that are now lost. While the number of these items was substantially less than the historical and artistic materials because they did not further his argument about the civilized nature of Javanese culture, This aspect of Raffles' collections indicates another explanation for the possession of Java. In conclusion, while there has been considerable interest in Raffles' collections for the information that they can provide about early Java and natural history in island Southeast Asia, they also indicate which contemporary European ideas and concepts that Raffles believed in. Raffles was also committed to both British mercantilism and imperial expansion for the benefit of, in his opinion, for the benefit of the colonized people, thinking that Java could attain its full agricultural and commercial potential under the British. Yet he was very concerned with his mission to make Java civilized by European standards. Through collecting, Raffles attempted to demonstrate that the British could help recover Java's lost past and thereby improve the future. The objects lent physical substance to his racist categorization of Java as relatively civilized, due to its history in the form of stone monuments and sculpture, and its contemporary engagement with that history in the theater. His collections were thus gathered as evidence to validate his beliefs and to promote himself as a scholar and colonial administrator. Thank you.